SLT Mobitel Home Broadband සමගින් non-stop ගමනකට data බෝවන්.
දසනකාන්තී චූර්ණය සහිත ලීවර් ආයුෂ් දන්තාලේපය දත්වල ඇති ප්‍රශ්න 10ක් වළකයි.
In your headlines tonight, false claims. The Register of Pesticides and the Ministry of Trade refutes reports of poisonous rice being imported to Sri Lanka as baseless. Report on samples due next week. 20 years of presence. Lanka Indian Oil Company to set up 94 new refueling stations across Sri Lanka in the next 3 years. Resilience. Sri Lanka's manufacturing and services industries return to growth territory despite subdued activity reported in other parts of the world. Final respects. President Ranil Wickremesinghe pays his final respects to Queen Elizabeth II as the Queen's state funeral is set to take place tomorrow. All this and much more coming up tonight, this Sunday, the 18th of September 2022.
විම් දියර මිලිලීටර් 100 ස්මාර්ට් පැක් එක රුපියල් 85ට දැන් වෙළඳ පොලේ.
From AdaDerana, this is AdaDerana First at 9. Live from Studio 24 in Colombo.
And a warm welcome joining you tonight on First at 9. I'm Indivari Amuatta. Now, with Sri Lanka's energy sector expected to undergo several changes in the next few months, the private sector player in the fuel supply duopoly, Lanka Indian Oil Company, said they expect to increase their footprint across Sri Lanka, with 94 new refueling stations to be set up across the island through the next 3 years. The Sri Lankan subsidiary of Indian Oil Company, which celebrated 20 years of operations in Sri Lanka, currently hold around 216 filling stations across Sri Lanka. Earlier in August, LIOC received approval to open 50 new fuel stations as part of the government's efforts to reduce severe shortages in fuel supply that crippled the nation.
During the next few months of this year, several changes are expected to take place in Sri Lanka energy sector, which currently is a duopoly with 80% operations by state-owned Ceylon Petroleum Corporation and a 20% market share for privately owned Lanka Indian Oil Company. By the latter part of next month, the Power and Energy Ministry expects 2 or 3 additional players to enter the market to ensure a wide availability of fuel throughout the country. While government invited expressions of interest from interested investors to enter the fuel supply market, government is also looking at restructuring the Ceylon Petroleum Corporation, which operates over 1,000 fuel stations across the country due to its heavy debt and operation inefficiencies. Cabinet approval has already been granted to appoint a committee to look into the restructuring of the CPC. On the other hand, the Lanka IOC, the smaller player that operates 216 fuel stations, is looking at expanding its presence further in Sri Lanka. Early in August, the Sri Lankan government announced that Lanka IOC has been allowed to open 50 new fuel stations in Sri Lanka. Lanka IOC said they expect to invest about 2 billion rupees for the expansion. Meanwhile, LIOC today celebrated 20 years of presence in Sri Lanka at an event organized at one of their refueling stations in Colombo 5.
We have plans to add 20 more stations this year, and finally we have ambitious plans here, and we are working with government of Sri Lanka on how to expand. However, as per the interest invited by government of Sri Lanka, there are other private players also coming in. So definitely we will increase our footprints. We have recently released one advertisement also, 94 locations. So we would like to complete that within next 3 years.
Minister of Transport, Highways and Mass Media Dr. Bandula Gunawardena says Sri Lankan authorities are continuing negotiations with Russia on the provision of a loan assistance to buy Russian fuel to Sri Lanka. In an interview with Sputnik, the Trade Minister said Sri Lanka looks forward to considerable support from the Russian side. Minister Gunawardena added that discussions are progressing well to secure fuel with Russian proceeds. Minister Bandula Gunawardena also told Sputnik that former Sri Lankan President Gotabaya Rajapaksa had appealed to Russian President Vladimir Putin to provide Sri Lanka a loan assistance to import oil from Russia and to ease the fuel crisis in the country. Meanwhile, the minister also said that Sri Lanka is a safe state for tourists to enter the country, as the situation in Sri Lanka has now been brought under control, adding that political stability is established in Sri Lanka. The minister added that tourism is a key sphere for Sri Lankan tourists, Sri Lanka and tourists from all around the world, and that they're welcome here. With reports of poisonous rice being imported to Sri Lanka receiving national attention, the Registrar of Pesticides and the Ministry of Trade, Commerce and Food Security were quick to refute these claims as baseless. Meanwhile, the Deputy Director General of the Food Control Administrative Unit of the Ministry of Health stated that samples of imported rice have already been submitted for lab investigations. The Secretary to the Ministry of Trade, Sisira Kodikara, meanwhile told us that if any imported rice were indeed found to be poisonous, a complaint will be lodged with the Criminal Investigations Department.
Two Sunday newspapers reported that rice imported to Sri Lanka contained poisonous chemicals, claiming that 596,440 metric tons of rice worth 64.5 billion rupees were imported to Sri Lanka in January this year, of which samples were tested by the Office of the Registrar of Pesticides. According to the reports, the samples tested contained 43% lead, 26% cadmium, 20% mercury and 47% of the poisonous chemical selenium, which could cause serious health implications including renal failure and cancer. Issuing a statement, the President's Media Division quoted the Acting Registrar of Pesticides, Lasantha Ratnavira, refuting these claims as completely false and baseless. The Office of the Registrar of Pesticides has said that no such testing as claimed in the news articles were conducted since January this year, and that the newspaper articles in question had referred to a report based on a research conducted in year 2017. The Acting Registrar of Pesticides, Lasantha Ratnavira, went on to say that the publication of such false news could lead to public unrest and that it is prudent to verify such news from the relevant parties when reporting such matters of sensitive nature. Subsequent to an inquiry made by AdaDerana, Chairman of the Consumer Affairs Authority, Shantani Rialla, stated that he has not received any laboratory reports on the existence of poisonous chemicals in the imported rice. He further stated that considering the controversial developments, the Consumer Affairs Authority is set to conduct an inquiry into the matter by submitting samples of the imported rice already available in the market for laboratory tests. Meanwhile, the Secretary to the Ministry of Trade, Commerce and Food Security, Sisira Kodikara, told AdaDerana that a complaint will be lodged with the Criminal Investigations Department in this regard.
Today morning, I discussed this matter with the Secretary Minister of Agriculture. He agreed to conduct a preliminary investigation at the ministerial level. I am going to submit my written request to investigate this matter because this situation is directly affected to the general public because they are afraid to use that imported rice. But I have to emphasize here, the Registrar of the Pesticide, he has already declined that the reports published by the media, that therefore I would like to make a request from the general public. We don't need to, afraid of, keep aside of this imported rice from our usage. There is no such issue. After investigation of the ministerial levels, if there is any requirement to continue this matter, we are going to complain to the Police Investigation Department and continue that investigation process.
However, prior to the newspaper reports, Minister of Agriculture Mahinda Amaravira also made a controversial statement to the media.
මගේ නම් මතය මේ රටින් ගේන හාල් සත්වයින්ට මිසක් මිනිස්සුන්ට පරිභෝජනයට සුසු ඒවා නෙවෙයි කියලා. මොකද මේවයි විශාල අපි පාවිච්චි නොකරන රසායනික ද්‍රව්‍ය පාවිච්චි කරලා තියෙනවා. අපිට වඩා බාල පොහොර සමහර සහල් වලට පාවිච්චි කරලා තියෙනවා. මං හිතන්නේ නෑ මේක මිනිස්සුන්ට වඩා හොඳ සත්තුන්ට.
Following the minister's remarks, the Food Control Administrative Unit of the Ministry of Health launched lab investigations on samples of imported rice at government-approved laboratories. According to the Deputy Director General of the Food Control Administrative Unit, Dr. Tilak Sirivardhana, a report of the tests conducted on the imported rice will be available next week. Addressing an event today, Minister Mahinda Amaraveera went on to offer a clarification on his previous statement.
ඒ ගේනහල් කන්න බැරි හාල් කියලා මම කියන්නේ නැහැ. ඒ රටවල් වල මිනිස්සු ඒවා කනවා. මම කියන්නේ අපේ හාල් ඊට වඩා හොඳයි. මම දන්නවා මේවා මම කියනකොට කලබල වෙන කට්ටිය. මොකද ඒ අයට මේවා ගෙනාම හාල් කිලෝෙන් රුපියල් 20ක් ලාභ දියාගෙන විකුණනවා.
Sri Lankan manufacturing and services industries outpace global trends. Details after this break.
රයිනෝ පුතා හැබැයියා ගෙදර නිදියන්නෙම අමූතු තැනක.
කාලගුණය කොහොමුණත් රයිනෝ නං වහලට සේෆ් තමයි මුළු ගෙදරම. Rhino cement roofing sheets. Then you know Rhino. I know.
Big 3
Uber Eats මගින් ඉදිරිපත් කරන ආදරයෙන් අවශ්‍යතා ඇතියට අත්‍යවශ්‍ය භාණ්ඩ පරිත්‍යාග කිරීමට වේදිකාවක්.
Welcome back to the news. The Deputy Speaker of Parliament, Ajit Rajapaksa, says a National Assembly will be established in Parliament next week, enabling support and advice needed for the government to move forward in solving the country's present and pressing issues. Meanwhile, representatives of the main opposition, Samagi Jana Balavega, as well as the Janatha Vimukti Peramuna, emphasized on the need for an immediate general election to reflect the true mandate of the people.
සර්වපාක්ෂික ආණ්ඩුවක් හැදීමට එකඟතාවයක් නැත්තේ විරුද්ධත්වයේ තියෙන්නේ ආණ්ඩු පක්ෂයේ විසින් තියෙන එක කනගාටුවෙන් උනත් කියන්නට ඕනේ. දවසින් දවස ඇමතිවරු පත් වෙනවා ආරංචි දැන් අදද හෙටද මන් දන්නේ තවත් කැබිනට් ඇමතිවරු ගණනාවක් පත් වෙනවා. මේ හැම දෙයකම යන්නේ ජනතාවගේ සල්ලි. සෑම දේශපාලකයෙක්ම තනතුරු අමතක කරලා සියලු දෙනා එක සහෝදරත්වයෙන් එක වටමේෂයක වාඩි වෙලා සාකච්ඡා කරලා මේ රට බේරගන්නේ කොහොමද කියන තීන්දුව తీරන අරගෙන ක්‍රියාත්මක කිරීමේ ක්‍රියාවලියකට අවතීර්ණ වී යුතුයි කියන එකයි විශේෂයෙන්ම අපේ අදහස.
එන සතියේ ජාතික සභාවක් පිහිටවනවා පාර්ලිමේන්තුවේ. ඒකට മന്ത്രിවරුන්ගේ පූර්ණ කැමැත්ත හම්බෙයි. ඊට පස්සේ ජාතික සභාවට පුළුවන් නැවතත් ආණ්ඩුවට අවශ්‍ය උපදෙස් දීලා රට හරියට ක්‍රියාත්මක කරන්න අවශ්‍ය සහයෝගය දෙන්න. ඒක ලොකු කමිටුවක්. ඒ කමිටුවේ සහයෝගයෙන් ආණ්ඩුව ඉස්සරහට ගෙනියන සහයෝගය ලබා දෙන්න.
මම දැක ලෝක බැංකුව ජාත්‍යන්තර මූල්‍ය අරමුදල පුනපුනා කියනවා. මේ රටේ තිබෙන්නේ නියම ජනමතය නියෝජනය කරන ආණ්ඩුවක් නෙවෙයි කියලා. ඒකයි මේ සල්ලි දෙන්න ප්‍රමාද වෙන්නේ. ඒකයි අපිට උදව් කරන්න අඩියක් පස්සට තියන්නේ. අපිට නියම ජනමතයක් ඕනේ. ඒ ජනමතය ක්‍රියාත්මක කරන්න කියලා ජාත්‍යන්තර සංවිධාන පවක් කියනවා. ඒ නිසා වහාම ජනමතයක් ඇති කරගැනීම සඳහා මහා මැතිවරණයකට ඉඩ දෙන්න කියලා අපි මේ ආණ්ඩුවට මතක් කරන්න කැමතියි.
කැලෑ නීතිය රජ කරන රටක ආර්ථික ස්ථාවරභාවයක් ඇති වෙන්නේ නැහැ. හිතුණු තැන්වල හිතුණු විදියට නීතිය අතට ගත්තා. නිවාස ගිනි තිබ්බා. ප්‍රශ්න වලට විසඳුම මේක නෙවෙයි කියලා අපි අවබෝධ කරගන්න ඕනේ.
මැතිවරණයකට ගිහිල්ලා පාර්ලිමේන්තු මැතිවරණයකට ජනතාවට අවස්ථාවක් දෙන්න ඕන තමන්ගේ මතය ප්‍රකාශ කරන්න. ඒ කියන්නේ අලුත් පාර්ලිමේන්තුවක්. ඒ පාර්ලිමේන්තුවල අලුත් ආණ්ඩුවක්. අන්න ඒකට ජනතාවගේ විශ්වාසය එනවා. ඒ විශ්වාසයට පුළුවන් අපි කියන ආර්ථික සලසම ක්‍රියාත්මක කරන්න. රනිල්ට බලයක් යනවා ලබන මාර්තුවෙන් පස්සේ පාර්ලිමේන්තුව විසුරුවන්න. රනිල් විසුරුවන්නෙත් නැහැ. ජනාධිපති Tamanට ව්‍යවස්ථා ලැබිච්ච බලයෙන් විසුරුවන්නෙත් නැත්නම් පාර්ලිමේන්තුව කට්ටිය විසුරුවන්නෙත් නැත්නම් අපිට තියෙන්නේ ජනතාවගේ බලයෙන් පාර්ලිමේන්තුව විසුරුවා ගන්න.
Sri Lanka has sought more information from the Ukrainian government and Ukrainian embassy in New Delhi on the news of the rescue of 7 Sri Lankan students from Kupiansk Medical College in the Kharkiv region in Ukraine. On Friday, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said that 7 Sri Lankan students had been rescued from torture chambers where civilians were abused by Russian soldiers in areas of the Kharkiv region in Ukraine. The Foreign Ministry said that it has requested the Ukrainian government to ascertain the accuracy of the news item and to provide more information on it as a matter of priority, given the need to ensure the welfare of Sri Lankan nationals in Ukraine. The Foreign Ministry in a statement said it is in close communication with the Ukrainian government through the Sri Lankan embassy in Ankara, which is concurrently accredited to the Ukraine region, as well as through the Ukrainian embassy in New Delhi, in order to obtain further information on the matter. Taking you to business news. Sri Lanka's manufacturing and services industries have returned to growth territory in August after the activity was subdued for 4 consecutive months given the country's dollar and fuel crisis. While Sri Lanka's services industries showed growth, the global manufacturing and services industries during the second and same period contracted on the back of prolonged COVID restrictions and constraints on global supply chain due to the war in Ukraine.
Sri Lanka's Services Purchasing Managers Index, which measures the performance of the service sector, returned to growth territory in August this year, recording an index value of 51.7 after declining for 4 consecutive months. Sri Lanka's figures are also an improvement compared to the Global Services PMI, which was recorded at 49.2 in August from 51.1 in July, indicating a contraction in global services activities. Sri Lanka's Manufacturing Managers Index also showed an improvement, reaching an index value of 49.6 in August 2022, up 8.2 index points from July. But the Global Manufacturing PMI recorded 50.3 in August 2022, marking a decrease of 0.8 points from July. With the increase in mobility amid the easing of fuel crisis in Sri Lanka, business activities in the service sector increased in August following a continuous decline for 4 months in a row. Accordingly, business activities mainly related to financial services, other personal activities, real estate, and insurance subsectors showed improvements compared to the previous month. Nevertheless, as highlighted by many respondents in the PMI survey, other supply-side constraints have continued to negatively affect business activities of some subsectors. In addition, the low demand due to high inflation reportedly weighed on business activities. As such, wholesale and retail trade subsectors showed a major decline during the month. Central Bank reported that headline inflation, as measured by the year-on-year change in the Colombo Consumer Price Index, surged to 64.3% in August from 60.8% a month earlier. This increase in inflation was mainly driven by the monthly increase in both food and non-food categories, with food inflation increasing to 93.7% in August from 90.9% in July, while non-food inflation increased to 50.2% in August from 46.5% in July. Of the non-food inflation, the transport sector reported the highest inflation in August at 148.6%, up from 143.6% in July.
Respect to the issue of the index of the purchasing managers going up and the inflation also going up, what I wish to state is that the economy is improving now and then organizations are going back into business, and activities that are involved in the private sector companies or maybe even the state is not bouncing yet, but the private sector is very, very optimistic right now. Although the inflation index says that we are on the, increase, that is a myth. Story of recession is gradually moving out of this country. Maybe the inflation index will come down. Maybe the results will be less by next week. But the private sector is very, very buoyant.
Meanwhile, as per the central bank's latest report on Sri Lanka's external sector performance, export earnings grew by 5.4% in July, while expenditure on imports declined substantially by 24.8% to $1.3 billion. As a result, the trade deficit recorded a notable contraction, thereby easing stresses in the domestic foreign exchange market.
Well, the export industry depends on the demand from the rest of the world, and the rest of the world is also recovering. The impact of the Ukraine-Russia conflict affected the global economy to a certain sector in certain parts of the world, but then that is now bypassed. Wheat and Ukraine economy is now also getting back on the feet, and so is the world economy, and the fuel price is dropping all over the world. If you take, for example, the USA was going in for about $7 a gallon, it's come down to $5 a gallon. So people will start moving and the economy will start improving, then the demand will grow. For our exports, we depend a lot on the garment exports. Orders are also increasing.
Total foreign financing disbursements made during the period from January 1st to April 30th this year amounted to $968.8 million, of which 968.1 million US dollars were received as loans, while 0.7 million flowed into Sri Lanka by way of grants. The majority of the disbursements were from loan agreements signed with India, amounting to almost 39%, followed by 37% from the ADB and 7% from China. The majority of the disbursements were for projects implemented under power and energy sector, accounting for almost 41.57% of the total disbursements, followed by the road and bridges sector at 21.5% and health and social welfare at 10.97%.
Well, that's all from us here tonight. Thanks for watching. Good night.